Welcome to the YAHOWAH blog. I am your host, Craig Winn. We are now embarking on our 15th hour, devoted to all that can be known about the terrorist raid that established what would become known as the religion of Islam. It was a horrific affair where the first Muslims were ruthless. They attacked a civilian caravan of their own kin, the very custodians of the Kaaba who had established the Islamic religion before them. They murdered some 40 men. They abducted for ransom 40 more. And they mutilated their victims. They gloated over it. They reveled in the plunder. And Allah would go so far as to say that he encouraged the murders and that he turned stealing into a religious rite. So as we continue and turn to the next installment of what is demonic dialogue in the Quran, we're introduced to Satan, who is Allah's alter ego, who is at the very least now in the same neighborhood working towards the same end. Moreover, we should attempt to distinguish between them, recognizing that they are both engaged to deceive, both encourage fearing Allah. They are both manipulative. They are both heard, but neither is seen. And so the distinction between them is really quite small, if it exists at all. The only point of departure between Allah and Satan seems to be on ethical grounds. Satan does not want to be associated with armed robbery or murder, while Allah's all over these things, well, like Mohamad on a 6-year-old child. Quran 8:48. Our producer is about to have a conniption fit over this. Wookie, however, didn't see the humor in it. Quran 8:48. And when Al-Shaitan, the adversary, Satan, makes their deeds seem zayana, appealing and alluring, good and right to them. And he said, no man can Galiba overcome or defeat you today of the battle of Badar. And verily, I am Jarun Lakom with you and for you, among you, and alongside as an ally. But when the two forces came into sight, he turned on his heels and he ran away. He said, verily, I am Marion, free of you, not responsible, and therefore I remain guiltless in this matter. Verily, I see what you do not perceive. Verily, I fear Allah, and Allahu, he is severe in his punishment. Okay, this is really sick. I mean, when you are reading the Quran and you find that Satan has a conscience and Allah doesn't, then you got a serious problem with that. And when you find that the Quran is acknowledging that Satan is with the Muslims, I'm there with you, man. And then Satan hightails it out of there because he just doesn't want to participate in mass murder or in armed robbery. But that's what this says. So let's go through it again because I'd like to reemphasize this point that the only difference between Allah and Satan is Satan has a conscience and Allah doesn't. And when Al-Shaitan, the adversary, Satan, made their deeds seem appealing and alluring. All right, so he's saying, all right, this whole plan to go and rob the caravan, boy, that's a really good idea. Let's go do it. So he and Allah were on the same wavelength at that point. Let's go do it. And he made it seem right and good to them, just as Allah has done, saying, hey, you know, we're doing the right thing. I wanted you to go kill them. I wanted you to murder them. I arranged this meeting for you to do so, and you should continue to kill them until the only religion is that of Islam. So at this point, they're in lockstep. No man can overcome or defeat you today. That sounds like Allah speaking to the Muslims. He said exactly the same thing. Well, lying to them, of course. And verily, I am with you and for you and among you and alongside as an ally. So here, Allah is saying Satan is the best bud of the Muslims. He is your ally. He is right there with you. He is the cheerleader. Yep, Satan is your big proponent, which is the point I've been making all along. But when the two forces came into sight, okay, when it was really time to get down to blood and gore, when it was time to do some real thieving, Satan grew a conscience and he turned on his heels and he ran away. He said, verily, I am free of you. I'm not going to be responsible for this. I am guiltless in this matter. Oh, God, when Satan is more moral than your God, you might have a problem here. Oh, verily, I see what you do not perceive. He's talking to Muslims. I'm scared to death of Allah. And Allah who is severe in punishment. Yep. Yeah, it's a fact of the Quran. Allah is worse than Satan. More punitive, more sadistic too. And you have Satan's own testimony regarding it. So who's to deny that Allah is worse than Satan? Okay, so if you were to take this literally, then you would have to say, Allah can't be Satan. He is worse than Satan. I'm not sure that's a win for Islam. Al-Shaitan is performing such an excellent Allah impersonation. Well, that at the beginning, it's hard to distinguish between the two because they have exactly the same mantra. I mean, right word for word. They're just one and the same. Satan is clearly Allah's advocate if he's not his twin. But that is till the point of the end when it's obvious that Satan has morality and Allah has none, and that Satan is not nearly as sadistic as is Allah. Ishaq Sirus reveals, Ishaq 319, Umar saw Satan at Badar. Well, there you go. Well, how do you see him, I wonder? As a goat, as a satar, as what, this horned dude that is perceived in religious lore, or did he see him as Allah? Anyway, he claims, Umar said he saw Satan at Badar when the devil turned. A surah was handed down concerning him. And then describing these events, Umar said in Ishaq 319, Satan made their deeds good to them. Now, these are the deeds that Allah has arranged. These are stealing and killing and abducting, human trafficking for ransom. And so Satan, just like Allah, and this whole Quran surah is making their deeds seem good to them, and said that they would be victorious, which is exactly what Allah said, because he was their protector, which is exactly what Allah said. But the devil deceived them. Okay, if the devil said exactly what Allah said, how did the devil deceive them? Unless it's a confession and Allah deceived them. Which is, of course, true. It's evident that while Allah stole his lines from God, Satan stole his from Allah. The, following the satanic interlude, the Quran mocks those whom Muslims were mutilating and murdering. The victims were called diseased because they correctly assessed that the Muslims were deluded and, of course, demonic and sadistic, at least up to the point of actually committing acts of mass murder and human trafficking, when, of course, they were more Allah-urific in their when it came to real murder at that point, because Satan wasn't into it. Well, evidently, much hasn't changed over the centuries. This is Quran 8:49. Then when the hypocrites and those in whose heart was a disease of disbelief said, these people are deluded and deceived by their religion. But whoever puts their trust in Allah, then verily Allah mighty and wise. Well, so following this interlude where Satan says, I'm with you, we're going to be victorious, you can rely on me, saying exactly what Allah had said, now we're told that the hypocrites and those in whose heart was a disease and disbelief said, these people are deluded and deceived by their religion. Yes, they are. When your God is worse than Satan, you're in real trouble when it comes to your religion. But nonetheless, Allah who has a snappy answer. Yep, he didn't provide proof that they weren't deceived. Nope, no prophecy, no cogent insights, no original narrative, moral story, no nothing. Just nope. Whoever believes Allah, then verily Allah is mighty and wise. Well, that's great. So if you believe that your God is demonic, then the demon is, well, mighty and wise. It goes hand in hand, doesn't it? That's the whole nature of belief. When we read Mizmor Psalms like the 91st, we discover that Yahweh deploys his malach, these are spiritual messengers, to protect those he loves. But not Satan, of course, because he wants to use them to abuse people because, well, as Satan just told us, Allah is very abusive. And Allah, well, yeah, and Satan, of course, knows. He says, I see what you don't see. And since they are responding to his orders, wouldn't this next line and this following statement infer once again that Allah is Satan? I'll let you choose. Quran 8:50. I don't want to spoil all the fun for you after all. And if you could see when Malakatu, the angels, see, Malak is the Hebrew word for spiritual messengers. And while it's translated angels here in the Quran, that's because of the Greek New Testament, and because the Christians in Babel, which was Petra, referred to the Malach of Yahweh by the Greek translation of messenger, which they transliterated agelos to angels. So the Quran actually writes the Hebrew word malach. So when the malach, and even it was al-malach, when the malach take away the souls of those who disbelieve, they beat their faces and they strike their backs. Taste the punishment of burning in al-haraki, the blazing fire. Quran 8:51. That is for what your hands have sent forth, and lo, verily, Allah is not unjust to his slaves. So the Yahweh uses malach for the express purpose of protecting those who are engaged in doing what he once done, If you are engaged working on behalf of Yahowah, helping his people understand God better, then you're going to generate the ire of religious idiots like Muslims. And they're going to try to kill you because, well, that's what Muslims do. And so to do something like I've done, which is to write the 5 volumes of Goddamn Religion, and before it, both Tea with Terrorists and also Prophet of Doom, you're going to get a lot of death threats, particularly when you do what I have done, which I did 5,000 radio interviews under my name about my research and findings. And so I received thousands of death threats. Now, yeah, and a fatwa from the Saudi Arabians. And the fact of the matter is that Yahowah had already promised that he was going to deploy his malak, and that they were going to protect me, my family, and my home, so that I would never have to duck. I would never be attacked by an irate Muslim under any condition. And now, 23 years later, here I am. I even do programs now on the video blog outside with the islands in plain view, so you can know exactly where I am. I even announce where I am. I even tell Muslims, you think your wannabe God is so great? Then you send him after me. We'll go mono o demono. I'm happy. I mean, I take on Satan all the time. He's a wimp. Yeah. So here the Malak is the whole Quran is written in bastardized Hebrew. Take away the souls of those who disbelieve. Now, of course, Malak are spiritual beings, and there is no indication that they have control over anyone's souls. And God, the real God, Yahowah, cares less about disbelievers. You can disbelieve all you want, and there is no penalty. There's no attack malak. They're going to come to get you. God doesn't care at all if you disbelieve. Now it drives Allahu, Allahi, Allaha crazy because, well, he wants to be perceived as God and not the adversary. So he needs everyone to capitulate to him. He needs slaves who believe him and will kill for him. But Yahowah says, I don't really care if you don't want to believe. That's fine, because I don't even care if you believe. Yahowah doesn't care if you disbelieve. He doesn't care if you believe. No issue whatsoever. His preference is if you come to know him, and his preference is that you not deceive other people and mislead them from the truth about him. If you are into belief, whether it is you believe or you don't believe, God's cares less. He has no relationship with such people. There is no punishment for them. There's no reward for them. At the end of their lives, their souls simply cease to exist. They are not taken. And as for beatings, nah. The fact is, the Malak are spiritual beings. And while they can influence the environment that we live in and provide protection services, they are never asked to go and beat people. So they beat their faces and they strike their backs. So in Islam, the angels are putative. They are as savage and sadistic as is the wannabe God, Allah. So when you're dealing with spiritual beings that beat people's faces, steal their souls, strike their backs, and say, taste the punishment of burning in the blazing fire, and therefore they are there as part of the regimen implementing the tortures, guess who they are? I mean, how would you don't even have to have a functioning brain to be able to figure this out. Allah is worse than Satan, and Allah's fellow demons are clearly demonic and sadistic. Allah is not unjust to his slaves. Okay. Tell you what, if you are a slave, there is no justice. Let's just start right there. If you are a slave, there is no justice. If there was justice, you wouldn't be a slave. So it is impossible for someone to be just to a slave. Now, this was a double negative, so he is not unjust. But I don't care how you phrase it. If you're a slave, you're being treated unjustly. But Allah loves the slave trade. Allah is addressing those he is tormenting in the fire as the Lil Abidi, his slaves, which is his preferred term for Muslims. Yeah, for him saying in this context, taste the punishment of the fire and this blazing fire that his demons have beaten on their faces and on their backs. And then he says, this is what you have sent forth. And then he says he's not being unjust to them. What he's saying is that they deserved it. His slaves deserved to roast in the fire. But in Islam, a Muslim is a slave to Allah. So much for the babes in paradise, huh? Off to the blazing fire for you. Turns out, submitting to the devil isn't a good idea. Who knew? As a result of having been demoted from a cherub to a snake, Satan feels compelled to claim credit for what he is otherwise unable to achieve. You know, cherubs are pretty cool dudes, man. They're beings with life. They have lovely wings. They're brilliant. They're immortal. I mean, it's a good gig to be a cherub. It's translated as cherubim in the Bibles, because they don't really know what to do with it, so they try to just transliterate the word. But that's who Satan actually is. The snake in the garden was a cherub. And Yahweh diminished him to a snake, a serpent. And therefore, when I refer to Allah as the snake that slithered out of the garden, because, well, that's who he is. And so in his quest to be perceived as a god, we find that Allah can't even pilfer lines from Yahweh without flubbing them. Plain God actually takes far more substance than the snake can muster. And the ungod's next misappropriation recognized that prior to the Exodus, Pharaoh's people were neither rejectors nor disbelievers. Their opinions and their religious beliefs were totally irrelevant, and neither they nor Pharaoh Thutmose III or Thutmose the Great were seized, nor were they punished. And why this would even be turned or be part of this surah is amazing anyway. It's like, okay, so everybody knows that Satan might have been seen at this terrorist raid, but Allah was nowhere to be found. And that all that Mohamad did was throw some dust in the direction of those that his Muslims were mutilating and killing and abducting. And then we got back and Allah claimed all of the booty and said that this was his idea from the beginning. And of course, he looks pretty inept. So at this point, Satan, Allah, needs to put on a little godly veneer, if you will. And, well, the only way that Hasatan can, as Allah, can look divine is if he steals some lines from Yahweh and pretends to be the God of the Torah and prophets, where there actually are proofs and evidences that Yahweh is God, except, well, Yahweh and Allah aren't the same name, and they have exactly the opposite demeanor and spend their time in opposite places, and they are the opposite in terms of their chosen people. Anyway, this is inserted into this to make the non-God of Islam appear divine. Quran 8:52. Similar to the way he forgot of the people, forgot of Faroon, which is supposed to be Pharaoh, and those before them. They rejected and disbelieved the ayat, the proofs, the verses, and the signs of Allahi. So Allahu seized them, punishing them for their sins. Verily, Allah, He is strong, He's powerful, and He's severe in retribution. You know, it's interesting. There are billions and billions of evidences that the Torah and prophets are divinely inspired. Prophecy is the biggest issue of them. But there's just little subtleties like some, 3,400 years before the Rosetta Stone was found, and we learned to be able to actually read and pronounce Egyptian hieroglyphics, and therefore knew that the title of the king of the Egyptians was Pharaoh, and that his god's name was Ra. Yahweh said these things, and the Hebrew language presents them accurately, transliterates Pharaoh, as the god, Ra as Ra. And there are just hundreds of such examples. But as bastardized Hebrew and being passed through two illiterates, Allah being illiterate and Mohamad being illiterate, they couldn't even replicate the sounds that had been properly replicated in Hebrew, which was the language that they were writing in. So it's Fir'aun as opposed to Pharaoh, even though it's Pharaoh in Hebrew. So similar to the way, not of, because there is no of and there's no the. So similar to the way people, Faroon, and of those before them, they rejected and disbelieved the ayat. We don't really know what ayat is. It depends on how it's used. They assume that it means proofs, verses, and or signs. But yeah, it's just this word that really has no value because there were no verses of the Quran. They wouldn't exist for 100 years. There's absolutely no proof of any kind in any of this revelation. In fact, it proves itself to be invalid with every word. And there were no signs from Allahi or Muhammad at any time other than they were psychopaths and sadistic and insane. And of course, if you try to then go back to the situation in Mitzrayim, which is verified independently in the Amarna letters, what you find is that there was no disbelief, there was no rejection among the people. The only person that Moshe and Yahweh were talking to was Pharaoh himself, not the people. So this is just wrong. And the people had no say. They didn't reject. And of course, there were no requests for belief. And while there were signs from Yahweh, and they were mighty, and ultimately they prevailed, Allahi had nothing to do with them, and they had nothing to do with the people disbelieving, because in dictatorships like this, it is the dictator, Pharaoh, that makes the call, not the people. The people were extraneous. And so this says, so Allahi seized them. No, he did not seize the people of Pharaoh. He didn't, and Yahweh didn't. So what's happening here is Allah, who is impotent, is trying to say, I'm really a good terrorist, man. I can punish with the best of them. But the fact of the matter is, Allahu didn't exist then. He wouldn't exist for another, 2,000 years after this time. And there was no punishing, there was no seizing of the people and no punishing them for their sins. Didn't happen. God could have cared less as to what the people who were essentially slaves. Nobody had any rights in any one of these countries at this time. They were all caste systems. So he could care less what the people believed. He had no interest in punishing the people. He had interest in getting the attention of and convincing Pharaoh that the right call was to let his people go. And therefore, all you have here is Allahu flubbing the lines, stating things that are not only untrue as it relates to the original testimony of this, which dates to 1447 BCE, which is 2,000 years before the Battle of Badr, and 2,100 years to the first copy of the Quran. And he's butchered the original story, and what he has said is inconsistent with reality because this would never have occurred this way. Now, whether or not Allah is severe in retribution, I'll let you determine that. He brags a lot about being the best of torturers. Verily, Allahu is an enslaver, not a liberator. And Yahweh, in the first statement he wrote in stone, as well as by his actions, proves that he is a liberator, not an enslaver. So they're the opposite. And he is clearly the enemy of the Jews. So he was a non-participant. However, if Allahi is 1 billionth as influential or severe as he protests, we'd all be dead, which has been his goal since the beginning. He just can't motivate enough Muslims to murder for him to achieve his life's ambition. Now, if this next statement were true, then the Quran wouldn't be filled with so many contradictions. As it is, Allah created so many of them, he was forced to explain how to resolve contradictions. That sounds unbelievable, but Quran 2:106 is a statement that says, if we contradict ourselves and we come up with something that's better than what we've said previously, we just throw what we said prior into oblivion. Yeah. So it's one of the reasons why it's so essential to reorder the Quran chronologically if you want to know what wasn't abrogated. And that's the advantage of goddamn religion, because it is the only book that rearranges the Quran chronologically, so you know what wasn't abrogated. And oh, by the way, the 8th surah was among the final surahs, which means nothing in this surah was abrogated. Quran 8:53. That because Allah is not one who changes. Then why do you have so many contradictions that you admit that you change things and abrogate what you said previously because you like a different idea? And that because Allah is not one who changes, a favor which he had bestowed on a people until they change what in themselves. And lo, verily, Allah, all hearing, all knowing. My producer is just giggling because she must think that that baby talk is charming. I mean, this is
contradicting the fact that he's contradicting that he's contradicting.
Well, so well, I guess if you are going to be a contradictor, then you have to contradict that you contradict, correct? Because how would you be consistent as a contradictor unless you contradict the fact that you contradict?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what he's doing here, I guess. So that is because Allahu is not one who contradicts. It's a favor which he bestowed on a people until they change what is in themselves. So at the moment the people change, then he's free to contradict. But it's a favor that he doesn't contradict and two people contradict. So, in other words, the Islamic God is controlled by the people. Okay, he is. He can be no less contradictory than the people he's influencing. Yeah. And lo, verily, Allah, he's all hearing, all knowing. I want to tell you something. God cannot be omniscient or omnipresent, which is what these two things suggest. If he was omniscient and he knew all things, there would be no purpose in anything in life and having relationships of revealing himself to us. Because if he knew everything, then there's no value in a relationship. So God has to preclude knowing certain things. Beyond that, the whole nature of our perfection is that our guilt is removed from us, deposited in Sheol, never to be seen again. So God precludes himself from ever being able to see anything that we do that are part of his covenant family that was less than ideal. So God cannot be omniscient and be and have a relationship with humans. Next, God cannot be all hearing, because that would mean that he is omnipresent. And if you're omnipresent, then you would be essentially the same as a rock or a slug or a piece of grass, and thereby indistinguishable from your creation. And if a God were to say, I want to hear everybody, which is the very different in Yahweh. Yahweh says, I only listen to those who listen to me. If you want to listen to me and benefit from what I'm saying, then fine, I will listen to you. But the vast preponderance of people, I mean, 99.9999999%, Yahweh does not listen to them. He does not care what they say. He is not bothered by what they say. It doesn't drive him crazy, which it would if he was listening to everybody. So this all hearing thing is to replicate the Gestapo. I'm there, man. You step out of line, you say anything, I'm going to know it. I'm going to make sure that I punish you for it. So repeating a lie just makes it irritating. It doesn't make it true. The Egyptians did not deny anyone, and they were not destroyed. Nope, they were not destroyed. Well, the only people who drowned were a regiment of Pharaoh's army. That was Yahweh's doing to protect his people, not Allah's. Quran 8:54. Like way people, Pharaoh, and those who from before them, they denied signs their Lord, so we destroyed them for their sins, and we drowned people, Pharaoh, and all were disbelievers. Okay. So, going back to the people of Pharaoh. Well, he didn't use the preposition, but I'm going to use it. Yahweh had no issue with, no even discussion with, no argument with the people of Egypt. His issue was, and he talked to Pharaoh. The Pharaoh of the Exodus is Thutmose III, Thutmose the Great. And it's now shown that Thutmose the Great did lose his son, and his eldest son predeceased him, and it's public knowledge that this happened at this time, and that Egypt's fortunes took a major dive after Thutmose III. But Thutmose was not drowned. It was only a small regiment of his army that was chasing after the Jews after they had been freed. But there was never any example made of the people of Egypt. It wasn't their fault. So Allah is simply wrong. And then he says, and those from before them. Well, who before them? Who? Well, he doesn't know, so he doesn't say. They denied signs their Lord. No. The people of Pharaoh did not deny the signs that Yahweh performed, much less the Lord. There was no Lord at this time. And they were not destroyed. That's just factual matter. You look at Egypt, the people of Egypt were not destroyed. And there is no reference to a sin by any of the people of Egypt. And the number drowned was only those in a military group that were chasing after the children of Israel. They drowned in the Red Sea. And by the way, there's traces of their chariot wheels and that sort of thing right there at the land bridge off Nuweiba Beach, which is where the crossing occurred. But no, all of this is wrong. And then it says the people of Pharaoh were disbelievers. No, they were believers. They had a well-developed religion, a religion that was infinitely better developed than Islam. And so they were not disbelievers. They were believers. So this wasn't a second translation of the 52nd verse. It was a senior moment. Allah was a very old snake by this point, and he'd been out in the sun far too long. As we venture deeper into this inverted realm, remember that if there is a parenthetical, and I've tried to present them in air quote of parentheticals, such as, well, in something that is upcoming, tanks, planes, missiles, and artillery. They are supplemental to the recital, but deemed necessary by the translators to resolve the grammatical omissions or to convey the intended meaning that would otherwise be obscure. Okay, so we'll continue. This is Quran 855, and where there is a parenthetical comment, I will go like this. Lo, verily, the worst of beastly creatures before Allah are those who disbelieve, and they will never believe. 56. Those who you made a covenant, it's a hiddat, vowed an oath and agreed to pledge, but they break their covenant, violate their pledge every time. They fear not. Well, it didn't take Allah long to contradict himself earlier in this surah. He wanted to come off more even-handed while slaughtering non-Muslims. So he said, if they relent, then all's good in the hood, or his words to that effect. Now he says that disbelievers never become believers. Oh, well, so it's a contradiction. Big deal. According to Islam's on God, a moderate Muslim is a hypocrite and a liar. To be a Muslim in the Islamic era requires the individual to acknowledge and honor the pledge of Aqaba, which is, by the way, where the children of Israel crossed. It is the covenant of Islam. These reprobate Muslims had agreed to protect the Prophet like they did their women, and to fight whoever, whenever, against all humankind. Now, they may have been naive and thought that he wouldn't include terrorism and human trafficking among the religious duties, but he did, and so they bailed on him. As a consequence, the bad, peaceful, peace-loving Muslims were labeled the worst of creatures. Allah is an uncomplicated beast in this regard. It's quite simply capitulate or die. It does not matter so long as every life is squandered. Either way, become a slave to Satan or lose your life. Although Allah seems to have a preference for believers killing disbelievers because it is a faster decline to extinction and there is no return for either party. Therefore, in Islam, it is a covenant of death, which is a non-negotiable precept in the Quran. Those who, in a bout of conscience, deemed it, like Satan, for example, deemed it immoral to engage in armed robbery, kidnapping, and murder, and who are reluctant to terrorize humankind, are destined to roast in hell. No more, Mr. Nice Guy. It was time to go back on the warpath. These are some of the most chilling words ever uttered in the name of any wannabe God. Quran 857. So when you fight them, and if you gain control and dominance over them in al-harb, the battle and war, strike fear in them and punish them severely in order to make an example of them, frighten them off, and disperse those who are behind and support them so that they may learn a lesson and be deterred. That makes Allah the merchant of death. It makes Allah and his religion a cult of death. The order in the Quran is not just to kill, but to be savage about it, to terrorize those you are killing. I've posted today the testimony of a couple of the Jews who were abducted by the Muslims, and they tell their story of how those who were killed before them were raped, mutilated, tortured, and how they were then raped and tortured in Islamic custody. And so they even talk about the glee on the Islamic faces as horrible things were being done to people. And this is what Allah is saying here. When you are a Muslim, you're not just to kill. You're to do so severely as to frighten people, to make an example of them, to disperse those, to strike fear into the hearts of your victim. So when you fight them, and by the way, this was only missing one verb. So when it was time to talk about killing and terrorizing people and being savage, Allah didn't have a stammer anymore. 857. So when you fight them, and if you gain control and dominance over them, then in the al-harb, the battle and war, strike fear in them and punish them severely in order to make an example of them, frighten them off, and disperse those who are behind and support them so that they may learn a lesson and be deterred. There's no way to reconcile these words with the Islam is a peace-loving religion myth, is there? Even Grok, if he wasn't bribed by the Saudis, wouldn't be able to work his way around this. This is more like the constitution of Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the PLO, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda. Oh, but what do they all have in common? Allah and Islam. The Surah presents the Towrah manifesto this way. And that's what this is. This is the terrorist manifesto. Right from the Quran, see Surah. Ishaq 3:26. If you come upon them, deal with them so forcibly as to terrify those who would follow them, that they may be warned. Make a severe example of them by terrorizing Allah's enemies. Islam is a death cult. Islam is a terrorist manifesto. These are not opinions. They are statements of fact. They are irrefutable. Now, before anyone puts their trust in the peace process or supports a treaty with an Islamic organization or nation proposing the foolishness of a two-state solution, they should consider the Quran's position. Should there be any concern over my literal rendering of the war surah, please consider what more esteemed linguists have proposed. Each variation speaks directly to what Muslims did to Jews on October 7th. Centuries before Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or Hezbollah existed, they didn't corrupt Islam. Islam corrupted them. Mohamad Sinwar even spoke of how Muslims are to treat the hostages. The clear Quran. If you encounter them in battle, make a fearsome example of them, so perhaps those who would follow them may be deterred. Deterred from what? Resisting the conquest and subjugation of the entire world by Islam. Pickthal. If thou comest on them in the war, deal with them so as to strike fear into the hearts and who are behind them, that haply they may remember. Oh, the happy terrorist? No, this is the happy victim of the terrorist. I don't know, happy, who knows who's happy? If thou comest on them in the war, deal with them so as to strike fear in those who are behind them, that happily they may remember. Yep, the happy terrorist victim. Yusuf Ali. If ye gain the mastery over them in war, well, it must be religious, right? Because this has got thous and ye's. If ye gain mastery over them in war, disperse with them those who follow them, that they may remember. T.B. Irving. Should you encounter them in war, then use them to frighten off anyone who comes in their rear, so that they may learn a lesson. Yeah, we got to be really careful of those who come in the rear. That's a really bad thing. They want to learn a lesson. They want to frighten them off. Abdul Hai. If you gain the mastery over them in war, punish them severely in order to disperse those who are behind them, so that they may learn a lesson. Dr. Kamal Omar. Well, this is a prestigious doctor, a PhD, filed higher and deeper. He wrote, so if you interlock yourself with them in war, then by routing them, strike terror in those that are behind them. Perchance they might get admonition. Oh, perchance. Mohamad Sarwar. Then, when you capture the unbelievers during a fight, teach them a lesson, so that they thereafter will always be aware of the threat of your power. Ahmed Raza Khan. Therefore, if you find them anywhere in war, kill them in such a manner that their remaining ones may be put to flight. Happily, they may be admonished. The happy flyer. If you find them anywhere, anybody, anywhere, kill them. Do so in a manner that their remaining ones might be put to flight. Happily, they may be admonished. Muhammad Ahmed and Samia. So when you defeat, overtake them in battle, war, so expel, separate with them from behind them, perhaps they mention, remember. Yep, that's what it says. So when you defeat, overtake them in the battle, war, so expel, separate with them from behind them, perhaps they mention, remember. I don't know if I'm going to be able to talk after this. I might get into pidgin English somehow. Long before the genocidal slogan, "From the river to the sea," was chanted by those who are falsely claiming genocide, Mohamad recognized that with sufficient brutality and cruelty, Jews might be expelled. Today, this approach would be held as a war crime, unless, of course, it was perpetrated by Muslims against Jews, under which circumstances, though defending themselves would be the criminals, all you have to do is ask those the United Nations or the International Criminal Court, and they will assure that the victims of genocide are the ones who will be convicted of genocide. Of course, Gutierrez, the Secretary General of the United Nations, was Yasser Arafat's lover early in his life, so he's not biased or prejudiced, of course, in any way. Those who would advance the suicidal notion of rewarding the approach delineated in the Quran and carried out by jihadists with the prize Muslims seek on behalf of their anti-Semitic lord, offering them a state carved out of Israel as a launching pad for an even more ruthless attack in the future, well, they must either be unaware of the contents of the 8th surah, or they are anti-Semitic and agree with the devil. And this would include almost every progressive, socialist, communist, and fascist on earth, and of course, most Christians and Muslims. It is as if they aren't smart enough to recognize that those who seek to annihilate Jews today will turn on Christians and then on atheists, agnostics, and ultimately themselves, as we are now witnessing in Syria. Quran 8:58. If you fear treachery or see signs of disloyalty from any people, including allies, then you may disregard and renounce your treaty with them and retaliate by breaking it off. Lo, Allah dislikes the treacherous. What we have here is Wookiee is very excited that his girlfriend, Asher, has re-entered the spot. Thank you for licking the microphone. And Asher is delighted that she has made it back in. So all is happy in dogdom. So here we are. So Quran 8:58 says all you have to be as a Muslim is be concerned that the people with whom you had you formed a treaty were being disloyal to you, or that they were allies of another. Well, you may renounce your treaty because, well, your word isn't any better than my word. We can both just agree that we will lie whenever it suits our fancy. In fact, this whole Quran is a lie. If it wasn't for lies, there would be no Quran. So feel free to renounce your treaty because I will renounce everything I'm saying as well, and we'll all be fellow renouncers. Break it off, retaliate. Allah just announced that an agreement of any kind, written or oral, political or religious, economic or defensive, with a Muslim isn't worth the breath or ink to convey it. In fact, it is counterproductive because it provides a false sense of security. All Israel must do to appreciate this reality is consider what transpired after the UN declared awarding them their homeland after the Oslo Accords or the withdrawal from Gaza. Unfortunately, should Israel make this mistake again and allow progressives and Muslims to impose the two-state solution, there will not be enough time or sufficient people left to express their regret. According to Allah, agreements are not only renounceable, which would mean the Quran is renounceable and can be revocated, but they are also the means of retaliation and treachery. For in the end, the Lord of War wants nothing less than total capitulation and death. And that's only possible when all hope is lost. Before we move on, please take note of the small print because it's important. Should they intend to deceive or cheat, is an open invitation to invoke Quran 8:57 through 60. It presupposes a hypothetical before anything occurs, and Muhammad knew it. Within days, he would claim that he feared the Jewish Hanukkah. He broke the treaty he had formed with them. He besieged them, he exiled them, and he stole their homes, their property, and their businesses. Such is the nature of Islam. I will share one more statement from the Quran, and we will conclude this, the 15th episode of our review of Muhammad's criminal enterprise. Quran 8:59. And not those who disbelieve think that they prevail. Verily, they will never be able to defend themselves or escape. I thank you for listening. I appreciate you journeying with me into the hell that is Allah, the Quran, and Islam. I hope that enough people shed their ignorance of this deadly and demonic religion to protect the next group of innocent people who would otherwise be raped, plundered, abducted, and murdered by Islamic jihadists. Thank you for listening.